Thank you. Very warm welcome to all of you. Thanks all for coming to what will be an exciting evening. We have a very jam-packed program with a very diverse input, different layers. I'll talk about those later. My name is Maak. I'm the Director of the Center for Business Ethics and Responsible Leadership. Thank you all for coming and accepting this invitation. So once again, thank you so much for coming. It's been an interesting journey in many ways, and I've chosen a quite somber title actually, Advancing Dignity in an Indecent World, for a few introductory remarks I would like to make. Where are we coming from? Why are we doing this? Other than obviously attracting research grants and corporate sponsorship, but why are we doing this? What are the key drivers for us? So we celebrate the opening of Burl, as it's called, or Beryl, more appropriately. The nickname as it was created was Beryl for centers. And as for those of you familiar with gemstones, Beryl has some healing capacities. It's attributed healing and calming properties. They actually can unleash healing energies if used properly. So I think it's quite a fitting acronym for us as we go forward for a center that aspires to help build positive futures. So we look at Beryl with that sort of ray of hope here that you can see above the sky in Mount Barker. Our center was established because we need orienting knowledge on how business in all its form, as a corporation, which is a traditional way of looking at it, but also as a benefit corporation, as a social business. Increasingly, we see more of those. Non-profit entity, how all those can contribute to making this world a better place. At the same time, we are in need of knowledge and guidance on how we can keep good people from doing bad things and bad people from influencing and affecting our lives. How can we protect our planet, the one planet we have, and share with other human beings and future generations? How we can remind both individual and institutional actors of their responsibilities to stakeholders and society at large. So in saying this, I touched on the 6 clusters, if you will, and people here are quite familiar with the image of a flower. When I came to uni essays some 3.5 years ago, I developed this in a different capacity, but it's still quite a fitting picture, and we try to use some shades of beryls here. So these are the 6 big themes for the center, 2 of which are in the name: business ethics, responsible leadership, integrity, social business, sustainability, and positive organizing. So in all modesty, but with a certain sense of urgency, we seek to address what some have called some of the grand challenges in business, or at the interface of business and society. One of which is this. So any guesses? That's my little quiz for tonight. So this shows the North Pole, and it's the left picture is 30 years ago, the right picture is today. So just you can see literally from, this is NASA imaging, and you can see how the ice has melted literally under our eyes. So sustainable futures, global warming and intergenerational justice, because that really is a justice issue as well, is a big theme for us. Any guesses where this is? So again, similar time frame. The left is about 35 years ago. The right is today. And this is a big city, one of the biggest cities in the world. This is Shanghai. It's a massive, explosive growth of a city and urban population that, unlike any other city. But you can see the impact it has on the environment, even from way above in the orbit. So with that come challenges as well: population growth, poverty, and the challenge to build an inclusive world. These are the predictions of the world population, in 2100. Interestingly enough, the biggest growth is not predicted for Asia or other areas of the world, but Africa. And nobody has really quite figured out what this means for us in our economies to cope with that. What is clear is that we're probably heading towards about 11 billion people, which is massive, and how are we going to sustain this? It's going to be a really big question, let alone living in a peaceful world. The other one obviously is, and that's really what we have done for years, is about the role of business in an inclusive world in terms of positive aspects. While we are still struggling with what I would label standards of common decency, responsibility and the impact of business on society. So the Provost has made some references to the banking scandal we just recently faced here in Australia. So there's some dark clouds over the corporate sky. This is obviously a European example, not a very intriguing one, but tells you a lot about how the automobile sector operates. So the emission scandal that hit not just Volkswagen but other companies as well. But you can do the same picture and just put the 4 banks there, which is interesting. I think there's a big challenge there, mainly evolving around a misunderstanding that compliance is also ethical behavior. It's not. There's a big difference between compliance and integrity. Integrity has a lot to do with the right values and whether or not you adhere to those values. And people just sometimes mistake compliance for integrity. So there's a big difference there. And I think the banks have to figure that out going forward. Now, not surprisingly, all of this has over time led to and this figure is really interesting, all-time low for CEO credibility. So this is a fairly recent survey. It's done every year by the Element Trust Barometer in the United States. And what it really shows is, you can see Australia somewhere there on the left, that only 75% of the population, if you ask them, they don't really believe CEOs or don't trust them. They think basically they're a bunch of crooks and thieves, and they're not to be trusted. And that's, for a variety of reasons, legitimacy being one of them, a shocking discovery. And it has been declining over the years. We thought after the big corporate scandals in the early 2000s that we had made some progress. We have in some areas. All of our big business schools, we talked about it today, have installed new business ethics programs and courses, but it hasn't really helped a lot looking at those figures. So there's a real crisis of trust if you look at it more closely. Which then leads to interesting pictures like this, which is people demanding really a better world, fed up by the greed and the money monster in a way. So the whole thing that came out of Wall Street over the years. It's for us, I think, to analyze what is happening, has happened, and show up ways on how to move out of this space and into a better future. Some of which are areas of hope, particularly in the purpose economy. Joe Madhyat, an old friend of us in India, is one of them. Then you have obviously Mohamed Yunus, and we're glad to have the Yunus Young Ambassadors here tonight, including Kat Dunn, the CEO of Grameen Australia, to talk about that part of what I think is a bright future for business in terms of its social business elements. So I would argue, very briefly, that stakeholders expect from business and business leaders in particular to do better and to do more. In addressing those big challenges I talked about, addressing the grand challenge required a concerted, collaborative effort, out-of-the-box thinking, and probably also new normative horizons. And I think that's what the center can contribute in, initiating a discussion around new normative horizons as to what the future should bring. I would also like to be clear about that. The time to act is now, not tomorrow, not in a few years' time. So we're really up for this big job as sense makers, as meaning enablers at the intersection of business and society to show pathways to a better, more inclusive future along those 6 clusters. Now that was an inspirational mouthful. Apologies. But it does seem that we really struggle in several areas. I mean, bureaucracy is an interesting one as well. I think despite all the efforts to change our workplaces into what some have labeled life-conducing environments, many modern-day organizations are still rife with excessive bureaucracy, meaningless managerialism. Avishai Margalit, an Israeli philosopher, has put it quite nicely several years ago when he talked about the problem not so much in the core of bureaucracy, but the fact that bureaucracies have the tendency to treat people as numbers, not as human beings. This is often disguised by the term human resource, as in human resource management. We still teach this in many ways. In these systems, people experience not just humiliation, but also the insult of non-recognition and ultimately the rejection from the family of man. That's basically what Margaret has put out quite eloquently. Margaret also reminds us that in pre-modern societies, counting people was forbidden. You would count cattle, not human beings. This is what brought big trouble for King David, for those who are familiar with the Bible and the stories. You know, he basically brought up a plague onto his people because he was starting to count its people. So sometimes I think it's interesting to go back and look at all this as it unfolds. Now, we all got used to being counted in a data-driven world, but I would argue that, you know, bringing the human factor back in through the activities of the center in what we label positive organizing is a very important task that we have to do. You know, equally important as perhaps the fight against global warming. And the problem is not so much that bureaucracy per se is bad, but the fact that the bureaucratic acts and managerialism strip human beings from meaning and purpose. And that's a fundamental aspect. You know, that's why also purpose, you'll find purpose in the title of tonight. I love this picture, which you know, depicts that. This is from the Humans of New York campaign, so I'm not sure whether you're familiar with it, but there's some really great stories in there. And I just love this one. So he was asked, you know, in a job interview to describe the ideal job that he would create for himself if he had a magic wand. And he basically answered, you know, I thought that was the stupidest question ever. I would never use my magic wand to create a job. Which obviously highlights the importance of purpose and meaning and, you know, meaningful occupation, which is different from a job, right? So with that, I think we sort of focus on our very own 4 Ps, which is the power of purpose, and some of which will be highlighted tonight. The importance of principles, it's really what is driving much of Beryl's activities. Key focus will be on dignity of people. Dignity is such a fundamental concept, and ultimately positive future. So that's the academic in me, you know, try to make sense. 4 Ps, there you have it. So dignity is an interesting and an important concept. I'll leave this up for a moment. I'll talk to it in just a second before I close. The German judge and novelist Bernhard Schlink has called it a yearning, or they call it a Sehnsuchtsbegriff. Something that we all aspire to, but you know, it's hard to achieve. You know, we don't really know when we see it. But it has been with us forever, essentially, you know, through the Enlightenment, John Locke, Immanuel Kant, and it should be driving our efforts to create a more inclusive, a more just, a more equitable world. So Kant has also come up with this nice expression of the crooked timber of humanity. So we are, you know, incomplete, but what we should strive at is that dignity. And to preserve that dignity, I mean, this photo is fantastic because it really shows what everyone can do as an individual person. This shows Vedran Smailovic. He's quite a famous cellist now. He's called a cellist from Sarajevo. So what you see here is him sitting in his full attire with his cello, this, you know, old Italian cello, playing Albondini's Adagio in the middle of the ruins of the Sarajevo Cathedral at the height of the Balkan War. And there's some, you know, if you want to Google it, there's some really interesting footage there. But this is a great picture about, you know, dignity and individual and personal dignity. So, you know, what we really would like to do as a center is help create a more inclusive, dignified world. We believe that we all would be happier, healthier, and perhaps even more fulfilled in a world of empathy, mutual recognition, and human flourishing, much as, you know, David Hume and Adam Smith had imagined it some 250 years ago. And the good news, I think, is that we have a research center now focusing on some of these really fundamental questions. The last thing I wanted to say is basically that we don't believe that our mandate is to manage the present, but that we really are into to shape the future in positive ways by focusing on this advancement of human dignity as we go forward. It's a wonderful poem I would like to close with by my favorite Chilean poet, Pablo Neruda. I'm not going to read it in Spanish because it will sound a bit pretentious. I'm just going to do an English version here. But he has this wonderful thing. It's called "The Future is Space," and talks about future is space, earth-colored space, cloud-colored, colored of water, air, black space with room for many dreams, white space with rooms for all snow, for all music. Come on, let's leave the suffocating river in which we swim with other fish from dawn to shifting night. It's a beautiful poem reminding us that, as human beings, we can always change. It's on us to be that change in many ways. And in some ways, it's a bit of the mantra, I think, that we're looking for with the center. So I thank you very much for being attentive, and I've probably been too long, although, well, it's okay. So thank you very much, and please enjoy the evening.